He had status, power, and an office overlooking the world, but no place to call home. Everything changes when he finds a little girl crying alone in a park. Between innocent words and deep silences, he rediscovers parts of himself that had long slept, and he realizes that sometimes a broken heart can find healing in the most unexpected places. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Let's begin. In the financial heart of Fifth Avenue, amidst mirrored glass skyscrapers and the incessant movement of hurried executives, Bernard Morrison was just another face in the crowd. At 37, CEO of Nexus Technology, one of the largest software companies in the United States, he personified the success so many yearned for: intelligent, methodical, relentless in business. His office on the top floor offered a panoramic view of New York City, a city that never slept, just like him. That September morning, as the sky threatened rain, Bernard reviewed the last quarter's numbers. Nexus had surpassed all market expectations, and investors were euphoric. But behind the facade of professional success, there was an emptiness that no figure could fill. The reports from the Miami branch have arrived. "Dr. Morrison," announced Martha, his secretary for almost a decade, placing a folder on the glass table. "Thank you. And that meeting with the Chinese, confirmed for 4. The driver will be waiting at 3:30. When Martha left, Bernard swiveled his chair towards the window. Below, New York City pulsed like a living organism. People in their daily routines, each with their own story. All connected in some way, all except him. It had been 3 years since his divorce from Helen. The separation had been civilized, like everything in his life, organized, efficient, without unnecessary drama. Just signed papers, and the realization that they both lived as strangers under the same roof. There were no children, just an empty apartment he rarely saw as he spent most of his time at the office. His cell phone vibrated. It was Richard, his CFO. "Bernard, we need to talk about Innotech's proposal. They've increased the offer to $2 billion. $2 billion? Bernard frowned. "We're not for sale, Richard. It's a tempting offer. The shareholders will want... The shareholders trusted me to make the right decisions. Nexus isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet." After hanging up, Bernard felt a restlessness. He needed to get out, breathe. He grabbed his jacket and told Martha he would be back in an hour. The streets of downtown Manhattan were damp from the fine rain that had been falling since dawn. Bernard walked aimlessly, just letting his steps take him away from the office. Without realizing it, he entered Central Park, that small green refuge amidst the concrete of the city's most famous avenue. The park was almost empty at that hour. A few nannies with children, retirees on their daily strolls, and office workers enjoying their lunch break. Bernard sat on a damp bench, not caring about his Italian suit. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the fine drops of rain on his face. That's when he heard it. First a muffled sob, then a ragged breath. He opened his eyes and looked to the side. Hidden among the bushes, a child, a girl of approximately 7, with curly hair and big eyes, was trying to hold back her tears. "Are you okay?" Bernard asked, surprised at himself for caring. The girl jumped, startled. Her eyes, red and swollen, stared at Bernard with a mixture of fear and distrust. "You don't need to be afraid," he continued, keeping his distance. "Are you lost?" She shook her head. "Then why are you crying?" The girl hesitated, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her worn blouse. "My mom said she'll have to work longer now. She hardly ever stays home anymore." There was something in that childish voice that hit Bernard like a punch to the gut, a raw, unfiltered sincerity. "Where does she work?" "In a store at the mall. And at night she bakes cakes to sell." The girl seemed to relax a little. "My name is Julia. I'm 7.5. "Bernard," he replied, not knowing why he was continuing the conversation. "And where do you live, Julia?" "In Greenwich Village. But I'm waiting for my Aunt Chloe. She works there." She pointed to one of the office buildings. "But today she's taking a long time." "And does your mom know you're here?" Julia looked away. "Sort of. So I was supposed to stay at school until Aunt Chloe picked me up, but I ran away. I don't like staying there after everyone else leaves. The teachers look at me with pity." Bernard checked his watch. He had an important meeting in less than an hour, but something prevented him from simply getting up and leaving. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Julia's eyes lit up. "I am." They walked together to a nearby diner. Bernard watched the girl, who was now animatedly talking about her school, her friends, and how she wanted a dog, but her mom said they didn't have enough space. "My mom works a lot," Julia said, biting into a sandwich. "Before, Gus's dad helped us, but he moved to Miami." "Gus?" "My brother." "He's 4. Julia took a sip of juice. "His dad isn't my dad. My dad left when I was born. My mom says he needed to find his own way." There was a disconcerting maturity in that child, a resigned acceptance of absence that didn't match her age. "Your mom must be worried if she can't find you at school." Julia shrugged. "She only picks us up at 7. Aunt Chloe is the one who'll be mad." Bernard's phone vibrated. It was Martha. "Dr. Morrison, the investors are already in the meeting room." "Tell them I'm on my way," he replied, then hung up. "Are you a doctor?" Julia asked, curious. "No, I work with computers." For some reason, Bernard didn't want to mention his position. "I have to go now." "Come on, I'll take you back to school." "I don't want to go back there," Julia protested. "Can I stay with you?" "Just until Aunt Chloe shows up." "I can't, Julia. I have an important meeting." "More important than me?" The question, asked with the brutal innocence of children, hit Bernard like a slap. "Let's do this," he heard himself saying. "I'll take you to your aunt." "Where does she work again?" "In the blue building over there." Julia pointed to an office building across the avenue. 15 minutes later, Bernard handed Julia over to a middle-aged woman, visibly relieved and at the same time annoyed. "For heaven's sake, child. You almost scared me to death." Chloe looked at Bernard with suspicion. "And you are—" "I just saw she was alone in the park and thought it best to help," he explained, handing her his business card. "If you need anything—" "Thank you very much," Chloe replied, still suspicious. "Come on, Julia. Your mom already knows you ran away from school." "Bye, Bernard," Julia exclaimed, waving animatedly. "Will you visit me?" "Julia, don't bother the gentleman," Chloe reprimanded. "No problem," Bernard smiled, surprised by his own gesture. "Bye, Julia." During the meeting with the Chinese investors, Bernard couldn't concentrate. His mind constantly returned to the girl in the park. There was something about her, a mixture of fragility and strength, that intrigued him. For the first time in years, something beyond business had captured his attention. That night, in his penthouse apartment in a luxurious building in the Upper East Side, Bernard poured himself a whiskey as he looked at the illuminated city. The conversation with Julia had stirred long-buried memories of his own childhood, of his parents' constant absence, always too busy building the empire he now commanded. A week passed. Bernard immersed himself in work as he always did. But something had changed. In moments of silence, he remembered Julia's face, her simple yet profound words. On an impulse he couldn't explain, on Friday afternoon he returned to the same park. To his surprise, there she was, sitting on the same bench, now accompanied by a small boy, whom he assumed was Gus. "Bernard!" Julia shouted when she saw him, her eyes shining with excitement. "You came back." "Hi, Julia," he replied, unable to suppress a smile. "And this must be Gus." "Yes!" "Gus, this is Bernard, the gentleman I told you about." The boy, a miniature version of his sister, looked at Bernard with silent curiosity. "You told him about me?" "Of course." "I said I met a prince in the park." Julia laughed. "My mom says I have a lot of imagination, but Aunt Chloe confirmed that you're real." Bernard laughed, genuinely amused. "And where is your aunt today?" "Over there buying water." Julia pointed to a nearby stand. "Today is Friday, so we stay at the park until Mom gets off work. It's our special day." Chloe returned with bottles of water and seemed surprised to see Bernard. "Hello," he greeted. "I hope you don't mind my presence." "Not at all," Chloe replied, still reserved. "Julia talked a lot about you this week." "Please call me Bernard. Mom will be happy to meet you," Julia exclaimed. "She always says I invent friends, but you're real." "Julia, don't bother the gentleman," Chloe warned again. "He must be busy." "Actually," Bernard replied, surprised at himself, "today I'm free, if you don't mind the company." They spent the afternoon in the park. Bernard, who couldn't remember the last time he had simply sat on the grass or played hide-and-seek, felt transported to a different dimension, one where spreadsheets and meetings didn't matter, where time wasn't measured in fiscal quarters, but in laughter and invented stories. Gus, initially shy, soon approached, fascinated by Bernard's wristwatch. Julia talked about her school, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and how she helped her mom decorate cakes on weekends. "When are you going to meet Mom?" Julia asked suddenly. I don't know if I should," Bernard replied, uncertain. "Why not? She's beautiful, you know. And she makes the best chocolate cake in the world." "Julia," Chloe interjected, "Mr. Bernard must be a busy man. We can't keep taking up his time. But he said he's free today." Chloe looked at Bernard with an expression he couldn't decipher, a mixture of distrust and perhaps hope. "Maybe another day," he said finally. "Promise?" Julia insisted. "I promise." When Bernard finally said goodbye, it was almost night. Julia hugged him tightly, a gesture so spontaneous and sincere that it left him momentarily speechless. "Come back next week?" she asked. "It's Gus's birthday and there will be cake." "I'll try," Bernard promised, knowing he probably shouldn't. On the way home, a light rain began to fall. Bernard walked slowly, lost in thought. How long had it been since he felt so alive, so present in the moment, without his mind wandering to the next problem to solve, the next contract to close? His phone rang. It was Richard again. "We need to talk," the CFO said bluntly. "Innotech has increased the offer to $3 billion, Bernard. The shareholders are pushing. We can talk about it on Monday." "No, we can't. They want an answer by Sunday. The board is meeting tomorrow." Bernard felt the familiar weight of responsibility returning to his shoulders. "I'll be there." Upon arriving at his apartment, he found a text message from an unknown number. "Thanks for today. Julia hasn't stopped talking about you. This is my number in case you really want to show up for Gus's birthday. Chloe." Bernard looked at the message for a long time before saving the contact. On the other side of the city, in a small apartment in Greenwich Village, Julia fell asleep dreaming of her new friend, while her mother, Louisa, finished decorating cakes to deliver the next day, unaware of how her life was about to change. The next morning, Bernard woke up before his alarm clock rang. The board meeting was scheduled for 10, but his mind couldn't focus on the numbers or arguments he would need to present. He thought of Julia, her frank smile, how she had turned an ordinary afternoon into something special. The penthouse apartment, with its minimalist and impeccable decor, suddenly seemed cold and impersonal. The white walls, the designer furniture, the absolute silence, everything he once considered elegant now seemed empty. $3 billion, he murmured to himself as he drank coffee. It was an astronomical sum, which would make all shareholders even richer, including him. He could retire at 37, travel the world, do everything he always said he would do someday when he had time. But Nexus was his life project. The company he had helped transform from a small startup into a technology giant. Selling it would be like giving up a part of himself. He arrived at the office earlier than usual. Martha was already there, efficient as always, with a folder containing all the necessary documents for the meeting. "Is everything all right, Dr. Morrison?" she asked, noticing something different in his expression. "Yes, why?" "You seemed preoccupied." "Just thinking about the meeting." He hesitated for a moment. "Martha, you have children, don't you?" The question caught the secretary by surprise. In almost 10 years of working together, Bernard rarely asked personal questions. "Yes, too. Why? How do you balance? Work, them, everything?" Martha smiled. "I don't balance. No one balances, really. It's more like juggling. Sometimes something falls. You pick it up and keep trying." The answer echoed in Bernard's mind as he entered the meeting room, where the board members were already waiting for him. Serious faces, open folders, the expectation of a historic decision hanging in the air. "Good morning, everyone," he began, adjusting his tie. "I believe everyone is already aware of Innotech's offer." $3 billion, Bernard," interrupted Edward Armstrong, one of the oldest shareholders. "It's an offer we can't refuse." "Actually, we can," Bernard countered with a calm he didn't feel. "And that's exactly what I intend to do." The room plunged into a tense silence. "You can't make that decision alone," protested another board member. "As CEO, I have the power to veto any sale. It's in our Articles of Incorporation." "Bernard," Richard's voice sounded conciliatory, "perhaps we should at least consider—" "Nexus is not for sale," Bernard affirmed with more firmness in his voice. "Not for $3 billion, not for 10. This is just the beginning of what we can build together." Over the next 2 hours, Bernard presented his expansion plan for the next 5 years. New products, new markets, strategic partnerships that could triple the company's value. In the end, even the most skeptical seemed at least willing to reconsider. When everyone left the room, only Richard remained. "What happened to you?" the CFO asked. "What do you mean? 2 weeks ago you were willing to at least listen to proposals. Suddenly you're talking like a passionate visionary. What changed?" Bernard hesitated. "Let's just say I got a different perspective." As he left the meeting, he checked his cell phone. He had saved Chloe's number but hadn't sent any messages. For a moment, he thought about writing something, asking about Gus's birthday, but what would he say? That he was a lonely executive who, for some inexplicable reason, felt connected to 2 children he barely knew. The weekend passed slowly. Bernard, who would normally work at home reviewing reports, found himself wandering through the apartment, restless. On Sunday night, he made an impulsive decision. He sent a message to Chloe. "Hello, it's Bernard. Is Gus's birthday still on? I'd like to attend if it's convenient." The answer came almost immediately. "It's tomorrow, 4 p.m. at our apartment. Julia will be very happy. I'll send the address." On Monday, Bernard reorganized his entire schedule. He cancelled 2 meetings, delegated others to Richard, and left the office at 3:30 p.m., something unprecedented in his routine. Louisa's apartment was in a simple building in Greenwich Village, a bohemian neighborhood that contrasted with the formal elegance of the Upper East Side, where Bernard lived. As he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, the elevator was broken. Carrying a large and awkward package, Bernard felt an anxiety he hadn't experienced since adolescence. It was Julia who opened the door, her eyes widening with surprise and joy. "You really came," she shouted, hugging his legs. "Mom! Mom! The prince from the park is here!" Bernard couldn't help but laugh at the nickname. "I brought a present for the birthday boy." "Is it that remote control car we saw in the magazine?" Julia asked in a conspiratorial whisper. "Something like that," Bernard replied, entering the small but cozy apartment. The living room was decorated with colorful balloons and a handmade banner that read, "Happy 5th birthday, Gus." A few children ran back and forth, while 2 women chatted near a table, where a dinosaur-shaped cake was the main attraction. "So you really exist," a voice said behind him. Bernard turned and found himself face to face with a woman of approximately 30, with curly hair pulled back in a makeshift bun, dark, expressive eyes that strongly resembled Julia's. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, and her hands bore traces of colorful frosting. "You must be Louisa," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Bernard. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. There was a caution in her gaze, a comprehensible reservation. "Julia hasn't stopped talking about you for days. The famous prince from the park." Bernard smiled, embarrassed. "I just helped when she was alone. I didn't do anything special." For a busy executive, stopping to help a lost child is indeed something. There was a slight hint of challenge in her voice. "Chloe looked up your name. CEO of Nexus Technology, aren't you?" "Oh, guilty," he admitted. "But today I'm just a birthday guest, if you'll permit me." Louisa studied him for a moment before smiling. "Welcome to our home, then. It's simple, but it's our little corner." The apartment was small, but every inch exuded life. Photos on the walls, toys organized in colorful baskets, handmade cushions on the sofa. So different from his aseptic penthouse. "Gus," Julia called, pulling her brother by the hand. "Look who came to your party." Hand brought a huge present. The boy, now wearing a golden paper crown, looked at Bernard with wide eyes. "Happy birthday, champ," Bernard said, handing him the package. "I hope you like it." Gus tore open the wrapping with the typical impatience of his age, revealing a remote control car almost his size. His eyes sparkled, and he looked at his mother as if asking permission to believe. "It's yours, son," Louisa confirmed, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned to Bernard. "You didn't need to buy something so expensive." "It was nothing," he replied, watching Gus already trying to open the box with Julia's help. Seeing his joy is worth every penny. The party unfolded with the chaotic joy typical of children's birthdays. Bernard, accustomed to controlled and predictable environments, found himself immersed in a world of games, laughter, and frosting smeared on the floor. To his surprise, he was enjoying it. "So," Chloe said, approaching with a glass of soda, "what does a successful executive do at a children's party on a Monday?" Bernard smiled. "Honestly, I'm having more fun than at any business meeting." "You don't have children?" No, no wife, no dog, no plants. Just work. And does that make you happy? The question, direct as an arrow, caught Bernard off guard. It used to. I think it used to. Later, when the other children had left, Bernard offered to help clean up. Louisa initially refused, but he insisted. A man who knows how to use a broom, she commented with an ironic smile. That's a new one for me. I've lived alone my whole life, he replied. You end up developing some skills. As Louisa put the leftover cake in the refrigerator, Bernard noticed a corner of the living room transformed into a small workspace. Her table with an old sewing machine, colorful fabrics piled up, and some doll dresses hanging on a makeshift clothesline. You sew? He asked. In my spare time, Louisa replied. I started making clothes for Julia's dolls, then for her friends' dolls. Now I sell them online. It's not much, but it helps with the bills. They're beautiful, Bernard commented, genuinely impressed by the level of detail. You have talent. It's more necessity than talent, she replied, but her tone indicated that the compliment had pleased her. When you're a single mother with 2 children, you learn to make do. And their father, Bernard hesitated, unsure if he was overstepping a boundary. Julia's father never acknowledged paternity. He disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. Gus's father stayed for a few years but decided he needed space. She made air quotes. Translation: he found someone without children and without bills to pay. There was a quiet strength in Louisa, a dignity that Bernard immediately admired. No self-pity, just facts. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're happy in our own way. My children are healthy. I have a roof over our heads, food on the table. There are people with much more who suffer much more. Julia and Gus ran into the room, interrupting the conversation, the boy still clutching his new car. Bernard, are you coming next week too? Julia asked, her eyes full of hope. Julia, don't bother him, Louisa reprimanded. Mr. Bernard is a busy person. You can just call me Bernard, he insisted. And actually, I'd love to come back if you'll permit me. Julia's smile lit up the room like a small sun. When he finally said goodbye, it was already night. Louisa walked him to the door. Thank you for coming, she said. You made Gus's day very special. The pleasure was mine, truly. There was a moment of silence, the kind of charged pause that happens when 2 people feel something beginning between them, but don't yet know how to name it. Maybe we could have lunch one of these days, Bernard suggested. You, me, the children? Louisa studied him for an instant, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. Why are you doing this, Bernard? We're from completely different worlds. Perhaps that's exactly why. In the following weeks, Bernard began to reorganize his life. He delegated more responsibilities, left the office earlier on Fridays to meet Julia and Gus at the park. Gradually, he also began to get to know Louisa better, discovering an intelligent, determined woman with a sharp sense of humor that constantly surprised him. One afternoon, as they walked through the park watching the children play, Louisa asked, You never told me why you decided to get close to us. What does a successful executive without children gain from spending time with such a common family? Bernard reflected for a moment. I think Julia found me at a time when I didn't even know I was lost. What do you mean? I spent the last 15 years building an empire. Nexus is my life, or it was, until I realized that outside that boardroom I have nothing. No one, he paused. Your children reminded me that there's a world beyond spreadsheets and reports. And is that enough? Are we some kind of social project for you? The question had a challenging tone, but also vulnerability. No, Louisa. You are real, and being with you makes me feel real too. As they talked, they didn't notice Richard approaching. The CFO observed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and concern. His boss, known for his absolute dedication to work, sitting on a park bench, talking to a simple woman while 2 children played nearby. Bernard? Richard called, approaching. Bernard turned, surprised. Richard? What are you doing here? You left early again. We have the video conference with the Japanese in an hour, remember? You weren't answering your phone. Bernard looked at his cell phone. It was on silent, as he always did when he was with the children. I'm sorry, Louisa, I have to go, he said, getting up. We'll talk later. Of course, she replied, with an understanding smile that didn't reach her eyes. The real world always calls, doesn't it? On the way back to the office, Richard couldn't contain his curiosity. Who are they, Bernard? I've never seen you so different. "They're friends," Bernard replied, simplifying a relationship he himself was still trying to understand. "Friends," Richard repeated, skeptical. "Does this have anything to do with your refusal of Innotech's offer?" "What? No, they're completely different matters." "You've changed, Bernard. You're leaving earlier, delegating important meetings, constantly checking your phone. The board is noticing. They're worried." "The board should be concerned with the results, which remain excellent. For now," Richard replied, with a tone Bernard couldn't interpret. That night in his apartment, Bernard watched the illuminated city while thinking about the conversation with Richard. It was true that he had changed. He felt lighter, more connected to something beyond work. For the first time in years, there were moments when he didn't think about Nexus. His cell phone rang. It was Louisa. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concerned about the late call. "Yes, just Julia asked me to say goodnight to you. She drew a picture for you today at school." Bernard smiled. "Tell her I can't wait to see it." "Bernard," Louisa's voice hesitated. "What exactly are we doing?" "What do you mean?" "This us, you appearing in our lives, the children getting attached to you, me—" She paused. "I'm afraid of where this might lead. I don't want them to get hurt when you realize we're just a passing curiosity." "You're not a curiosity, Louisa." "Then what are we? Because honestly, I can't imagine how a man like you fits into our lives long term. And for me, the children are forever. I can't risk it." Her honesty hit him hard. Louisa was right in her concerns. What was he offering? What did he really want? "I understand your concerns," he finally replied. "I don't have all the answers, Louisa. I just know that I've never felt so alive as in the last few weeks. If you want me to step away, I'll respect that. But know that the three of you are already important to me. More than I can explain." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I want to believe you," she finally said. "But I need to protect my heart, and especially theirs." After hanging up, Bernard remained awake for hours, reflecting on his life, his choices, and the uncertain future that now lay before him. At the office, Nexus continued to be his professional priority. But in his heart, new priorities were beginning to take shape. In the weeks that followed, Bernard found himself living a double life. From Monday to Friday, from 8 to 5, he was the ruthless president of Nexus, the visionary who had rejected a billion-dollar offer because he believed in the company's potential. But in the evenings and on weekends, he was just Bernard, the man who helped Gus with his remote control car, who patiently listened to Julia's endless stories about her school, who had learned to make chocolate pancakes because it was the children's favorite breakfast. The transition between these two worlds was not always smooth. There were days when he left a tense meeting, straight for Louisa's apartment, trying to leave corporate worries behind. Other times, he was helping Julia with her homework when his cell phone wouldn't stop ringing with urgent calls from the office. On a sunny Saturday in October, Bernard took the children to Prospect Park. Louisa couldn't accompany them. She had dress orders to deliver and needed to work. As Julia and Gus ran across the lawn, chasing soap bubbles he blew, Bernard wondered how something so simple could bring so much joy. "More! More!" Gus shouted, jumping to pop the iridescent bubbles in the air. "You have to make giant bubbles," Julia instructed with the seriousness of an expert. "The ones where you can see the rainbow inside." Bernard obeyed, dipping the wand into the soapy solution and blowing carefully. A huge bubble floated slowly, reflecting the blue sky and the green of the trees. The children screamed with excitement. "Look, Bern! That one was perfect," Julia exclaimed, using the nickname she had created for him. The nickname still surprised him every time. No one had ever called him that, not even his parents, always formal and distant. There was an intimacy in those two letters that warmed him inside. "Now it's your turn," he said, handing the bottle to Julia. "Show me how it's done." While the children took turns blowing bubbles, Bernard took some photos with his phone. He wanted to show Louisa later, so she could somehow participate in that moment. His phone vibrated. It was Richard again. "Yes?" Bernard answered, moving away a little so the children wouldn't hear. "We have a problem," Richard announced bluntly. "Innotech leaked information about the offer to the press. The market is reacting. We need an official statement. Issue a note reiterating that Nexus is not for sale." "It's not that simple," Edward Armstrong gave an interview implying that your decision was hasty and that the board is re-evaluating the offer. Bernard felt his blood boil. He has no authority to speak on behalf of the board. Nevertheless, he spoke. And the market is listening. Our shares have already fallen 8% since opening. Call an extraordinary meeting for Monday morning, Bernard instructed. And prepare a press statement reaffirming our position. I'll sign it remotely. Bernard, I think you need to come in now. This is serious. He looked at Julia and Gus laughing and running in the sun. He had promised them the whole day. I can't, Richard. I have an unmissable commitment. More important than the company you sacrificed 15 years of your life for? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Send the statement to my email, Bernard finally replied. I'll sign it in an hour. As he hung up, he noticed Julia watching him with a worried expression. Do you have to go? She asked, her big brown eyes fixed on him. No, Princess. I just need to sort out a small work thing later. Promise? I promise. Later, when he dropped the children off at home, Louisa immediately noticed that something was wrong. Did something happen? She asked after Julia and Gus had gone to take a bath. Work problems, Bernard replied vaguely. Nothing important. Louisa studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond words. If it wasn't important, you wouldn't have that wrinkle between your eyebrows. He smiled, surprised that she noticed details he didn't even perceive. It's just internal politics, someone trying to undermine me. Louisa sat beside him on the sofa. Do you want to talk about it? It was strange. In his world, corporate problems were discussed in meeting rooms, with PowerPoint presentations and data analysis. Not on worn sofas, with a woman who had probably never read a financial report in her life. And yet Bernard found himself telling her everything. Innotech's offer, his refusal, Edward Armstrong's betrayal, the board's pressures. Louisa listened attentively without interrupting. What irritates me most, Bernard concluded, is that they only think about immediate profit. They don't see the long-term potential. And what is that potential? Louisa asked simply. The question caught him by surprise. He was so used to defending his vision in terms of financial projections and market expansion that for a moment he hesitated. We change the way companies manage their data, he finally replied. Our technology allows for smarter, more efficient decisions. It helps reduce waste, optimize resources. And is that important to you? It's my life's work. Louisa nodded, thoughtful. You know what intrigues me? How you can be so passionate about your work and at the same time so disconnected from everything else. What do you mean? Bernard, you're almost 40. You have a billion-dollar company. And until a few weeks ago, your life was all about work. No friends, no family, no hobbies, nothing. She paused. What happened to you? The question reverberated within him like a stone dropped into deep water. What had happened? When exactly had his life become so one-dimensional? I guess I've always been like that, he finally replied. My parents were the same. Workaholics, they built an empire, but they were never present. I grew up believing that professional success was the only measure that mattered. And now, now, I don't know anymore. When I'm with you with the children, I feel like I'm discovering parts of myself I didn't even know existed. He smiled. Did you know I'd never blown soap bubbles before? You're kidding. Never, not even as a child. Louisa looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and compassion. You missed a lot, didn't you? I think so. But I'm trying to catch up. That night, upon returning to his apartment, Bernard drafted an email to the entire board, reaffirming his position against the sale and calling for a formal vote. If they wanted to remove him, they would have to do it openly. On Monday, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. Martha greeted him with a worried expression. The board members are already in the meeting room, she informed him. Edward Armstrong brought his lawyer. Thank you, Martha. Dr. Morrison, she hesitated. Whatever is happening, know that most of the employees are on your side. He nodded, grateful for the support. The meeting was tense from the start. Edward Armstrong, a man in his 60s, his face flushed with contained anger, went straight to the point. Your refusal to even consider Innotech's offer is irresponsible, Bernard. We're talking about $3 billion. Nexus is worth much more than that in the long run, Bernard replied calmly. And you know that, Edward. That's why Innotech is so interested. That's not the point, another board member interjected. The issue is, you made this decision unilaterally without consulting the board. Because I knew some of you would only think about immediate profit. My job as CEO is to think beyond, about the future of the company. Your job is to maximize shareholder value, Edward retorted. And now we're questioning your ability to do that. Because of a single decision? No, Edward replied, his eyes narrowing. Because of your recent distractions. A tense silence fell over the room. Bernard felt a chill in his stomach. I don't know what you're talking about. Edward slid a folder across the table. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. Bernard opened the folder and found photos. Of him with Julia and Gus in the park. Of him entering Louisa's building. Of him helping the children get out of the car. Photos taken from a distance, clearly without his knowledge. You spied on me? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. We hired a security firm to assess potential risks to Nexus's reputation, Edward replied, without a hint of remorse. Considering Innotech's offer, we needed to ensure our CEO was acting in the best interest of the company. And these photos prove otherwise? They prove you are emotionally involved in a complicated situation, a single mother with 2 children from different fathers, living in precarious conditions. We don't need a scandal now, Bernard. The fury Bernard felt at that moment was new to him, a visceral anger that had nothing to do with business strategies or corporate disputes. It was personal, primitive. You have crossed every line, Edward, he said, each word loaded with a calm he didn't feel. My personal life is none of your business, nor the board's. It is our business when it affects your decisions as CEO. This is ridiculous, Richard interjected. Bernard has been impeccable in his management. The results speak for themselves. For now, Edward replied, but we all know how this kind of involvement ends. Money disappearing, scandals, emotional blackmail. Bernard stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. No, it's not, Edward retorted. We have a vote to conduct on your continued tenure as CEO. You have no authority to remove me without just cause. We do if you are deemed incapable of performing your duties. And a man who refuses to consider a $3 billion offer because he is distracted by his new family is clearly not in full exercise of his faculties. Bernard looked at each face around the table. Some averted their gaze, embarrassed. Others maintained eye contact, defiant. Do you really want to do this? He asked, his voice calm again. Because if you start this vote, regardless of the outcome, my next call will be to our lawyers, and then to the press. I'm sure they'll be very interested. To know how the Nexus board spies on its own CEO and tries to emotionally blackmail him using innocent children as a weapon. The silence that followed was deafening. Is that a threat? Edward finally asked. No, Edward. It's a promise. Bernard collected the photos and put them back in the folder. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. As he left the room, Bernard felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. He had never confronted the board that way. He had never felt so passionately defensive about something other than Nexus itself. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Meetings, calls, decisions made on autopilot. His mind was elsewhere. On the photos, on Edward's disdainful expression when referring to Louisa and the children, on the ease with which his corporate world and his personal world had collided. At 6 in the evening, his cell phone rang. It was Louisa. Hello, he answered, trying to sound normal. Is everything all right? She asked immediately. You disappeared all day. Complicated day at work. Sorry I didn't call earlier. Bernard, Louisa's voice hesitated. Something strange happened today. He felt his heart race. What? A man came to the store where I work, said he was from Nexus, that he was doing research on you. Asked several questions. About us. What kind of questions? Bernard tried to control his rising anger. How we met, if you help me financially, if the children know who you are. She paused. Bernard, who was that man? Why is your company investigating me? He closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. It wasn't Nexus, Louisa. It was someone hired by one of the board members. Someone who wants to harm me. Why? Because I refused to sell the company. And because they found out about us. And is that a problem? Are we a problem for you? There was a vulnerability in Louisa's voice that deeply affected him. No, never. The problem is them, not you. He took pictures of the children, Bernard, Louisa said. her voice now filled with fear and anger. At the school gate. That's terrifying. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. I'll sort this out, Louisa. I promise. They've gone too far. After hanging up, Bernard remained motionless for a few minutes, weighing his options. Then he made a decision. He picked up the phone and made a call. Dr. Maxwell, this is Bernard Morrison. I need your services urgently. Yes, it's a delicate matter. Can we meet today? Excellent. I'll be there in an hour. Carlos Maxwell was the most respected and feared lawyer in New York City. Specializing in corporate law and defamation cases, he had a reputation for ferocity in court. If anyone could help him confront Edward Armstrong, it would be him. During the meeting with Maxwell, Bernard explained the situation without omitting details. The lawyer listened attentively, making occasional notes. They crossed several legal lines, Maxwell finally concluded. Invasion of privacy, photographing minors without authorization, harassment. We have a solid case here. I don't necessarily want to sue, Bernard explained. I just want them to stop, and for it to be clear that my personal life is untouchable. I understand. In that case, a very forceful cease and desist letter should suffice, accompanied by a frank conversation with the board about the legal and reputational implications of their actions. Bernard nodded. I want the investigators prosecuted, and I want guarantees that all photos and reports are destroyed. Consider it done. Now, if you'll permit my frankness. Maxwell adjusted his glasses. Are you really willing to risk your position at Nexus because of this relationship? Bernard didn't hesitate. Yes. Even knowing you could lose everything you've worked for over the years. Dr. Maxwell, I recently learned that everything I've worked for may not be all that matters in life. The lawyer smiled. Interesting. In 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen executives of your caliber come to that conclusion before a heart attack or a bitter divorce. As he left Maxwell's office, Bernard drove to Louisa's apartment without warning. He needed to see her to personally explain what was happening. More than that, he needed to make sure she and the children were okay. When Louisa opened the door, her eyes were red. She had been crying. What happened? He asked, alarmed. Julia came home from school today asking if you were leaving like Gus's dad, she replied, letting him in. Apparently, the man who took the pictures talked to her, said you were too important to stay with us for long. Bernard felt his blood run cold. He talked to Julia? Directly? Louisa nodded, tears forming in her eyes. She's devastated, Bernard, and I'm scared. What kind of person does that to a child? Someone who will deeply regret it, he replied, hugging her. I promise, Louisa, I'll fix this. How? These people have power, money, influence. We are nobody. Don't say that. You are everything to me now. Everything. The words came out before he could think, but as soon as he uttered them, Bernard realized they were true. And I also have power and resources. I won't let them intimidate us. That night, Bernard had a long talk with Julia, assuring her that he wasn't going anywhere, that the man who had spoken to her was wrong. The girl, lying on her makeshift bed in the living room, hugged him tightly. Promise you won't leave, Bern? I promise, Princess, I'm here to stay. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, Bernard and Louisa talked in low voices in the small kitchen. What are we going to do? She asked, holding a cup of tea in her hands. First, I'm going to make sure these men never come near you again. I've already hired a lawyer. And then? Bernard hesitated. That depends on you, Louisa. On me. On what you want. On what you expect. From us. Louisa lowered her eyes. I'm afraid to want something I can't have. And what is that? A family, Bernard. Stability. Someone who is present not only in the good times, but also in the difficult ones. Someone who sees the children as their own, who doesn't abandon them when the novelty wears off. Is that what you think? That you are a novelty to me? I don't know what to think. Our worlds are so different. Perhaps it's time to create our own world, then. The words hung between them, full of possibilities. Bernard took Louisa's hands in his. I don't know what the future holds, Louisa, but I know I want to face it with you by my side. That night, for the first time, Bernard did not sleep on the sofa. And waking up the next morning with Louisa nestled in his arms, he knew he had found his true place in the world. The next morning, upon arriving at the office, he found Richard waiting in his room. "The board is calling an extraordinary shareholders meeting," the CFO announced without preamble. "They're going to try to formally remove you." Bernard nodded, already expecting it. "Let them try." "Do you have a plan?" "I do, and I'm going to need your help." As he explained his strategy to Richard, Bernard realized he was at a crossroads. The path he chose would define not only the future of Nexus, but his own, and for the first time since he founded the company, he wasn't sure if both futures still pointed in the same direction. The extraordinary meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later, enough time for Bernard to prepare his defense. During this period, he practically lived between his office and Louisa's apartment. Determined not to neglect any of the parts of his life he now considered essential. One afternoon, while reviewing documents at Louisa's small kitchen table, he felt someone tugging at his sleeve. It was Gus, with a colorful drawing in his hands. "I made it for you," the boy said, holding out the paper. Bernard contemplated. The drawing, 4 stick figures, 2 large and 2 small, all holding hands. A house in the background, a smiling sun in the corner. "Is that us?" Gus nodded solemnly. "It's our family." The word family resonated within Bernard with an intensity that surprised him. Was that what they had become? A family, he realized. That yes. And the most surprising thing was how natural that idea seemed now. "It's beautiful, champ," he said, hugging the boy. "Can I put it in my office?" Gus's eyes lit up. "You can. Then everyone will see that you have a family." The declaration, made with the simple, direct logic of children, crystallized something within Bernard. He had a family now, and he would fight for it with the same determination with which he had always fought for Nexus. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Bernard and Louisa sat on the small balcony of the apartment. The city lights formed a luminous carpet below them, less impressive than the view from his penthouse, but somehow more welcoming. "How are the preparations for the meeting coming along?" Louisa asked, pouring herself some cheap wine Bernard had brought. "Progressing. I have the support of several important shareholders, and my lawyer is preparing a counterattack that will make Edward Armstrong wish he had never messed with me." He paused. "But that's not what I want to talk about." "About what, then?" "About us. About the future." Bernard took a deep breath. "Louisa, regardless of what happens with Nexus, I've realized something in the last few weeks. Something important." "What?" she asked, her eyes fixed on him. "That the life I built, despite all the professional achievements, was empty. Until I met you and the children. You showed me a world I didn't even know I was missing." Louisa smiled, a small, cautious smile. "That's quite a revelation for a successful executive." "Indeed," Bernard laughed. "If someone had told me 3 months ago that I'd be here having this conversation, I'd have thought they were crazy." "And now?" "Now I know I was just beginning to live." He took Louisa's hands in his. "I want us to make this work, Louisa. I want to be a part of your lives, officially, permanently." Louisa's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "It's a big commitment, Bernard. It's not just me. 2 children come in the package. Children who have already suffered too many abandonments. I'm more sure of this than of any decision I've ever made in my life. Even knowing it might cost you your company, everything you've worked for. If I have to choose between you and Nexus, I choose you." Without hesitation, Louisa hugged him tightly, tears now flowing freely. "I never thought I'd find someone like this. Someone who truly saw me, who saw my children as a gift, not a burden. You are the best gift life could have given me." That night, for the first time, Bernard did not sleep on the sofa. And waking up the next morning with Louisa nestled in his arms, he knew he had found his true place in the world. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with intense preparation. Bernard divided his time between meetings with lawyers, individual conversations with key shareholders, and nights at Louisa's house, helping with homework and bedtime stories. On the eve of the meeting, Richard sought him out with worrying news. "Edward Armstrong is convinced he's going to win tomorrow," the CFO informed him. It seems he has some ace up his sleeve. What kind of ace? I'm not sure, but he's too confident. I think we should prepare for any scenario. Bernard nodded, thoughtful. Thanks for the warning, and Richard, thank you for standing by me in this battle. I'm not just by your side as a friend, Bernard. I'm convinced you're the best for Nexus. Besides, he added with a smile, I've never seen you as happy as in the last few weeks. Whatever that woman and those children awakened in you, I can only thank them. That night, Bernard did something he had never done before. He took Louisa and the children to see his apartment. He wanted them to see this part of his life, to understand where he came from before everything potentially changed. Wow, Julia exclaimed upon entering the penthouse. It looks like a palace. Gus immediately ran to the balcony, pressing his face against the glass. Look, Mom, you can see our house from here. Louisa seemed uncomfortable, out of place among the designer furniture and expensive artworks. It's impressive, she commented, clearly intimidated. It's just an apartment, Bernard replied, noticing her tension. An empty place where I spent a few hours sleeping between meetings. It doesn't look empty to me, Louisa retorted, observing the impeccable decor. It looks perfect. Perfect and sterile, Bernard said. Without real life, without children's laughter, without the smell of cake in the oven, without drawings on the refrigerator. As the children curiously explored each room, Bernard and Louisa talked on the balcony, the illuminated city at their feet. Don't you miss this luxury when you're in our cramped apartment? She finally asked. No, Bernard replied without hesitation. You know what I realized, Louisa? Luxury without purpose is just waste. This place was never a home, just a status symbol I thought I needed. And what do you really need? You a family, a purpose beyond accumulating money and power. He smiled. I need chocolate pancakes on Sunday mornings. Julia's crazy stories, Gus's cars scattered on the floor. You're scolding when I let the children eat dessert before dinner. Louisa laughed, relaxing a little. I never imagined a successful executive could value such simple things. Neither did I, but I learned. You taught me. Later, when they returned to Louisa's apartment, Bernard made a decision. Regardless of the outcome of the meeting the next day, he knew what his next step would be. The Nexus conference room was packed the next morning. Shareholders, board members, lawyers, all gathered for what promised to be one of the most dramatic events in the company's history. Bernard, wearing his best suit, appeared calm and confident externally, though his heart was pounding. Edward Armstrong was the first to speak, formally presenting the motion to remove Bernard from the CEO position. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice laden with false solemnity, we are here today because the leadership of this company is compromised. Mr. Morrison has demonstrated questionable judgment, refusing to consider advantageous offers, and more worryingly, engaging in personal relationships that pose a risk to Nexus's reputation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Bernard maintained a neutral expression. To illustrate the gravity of the situation, Edward continued, I would like to present some evidence. An assistant distributed folders to everyone present. Bernard felt a chill in his stomach. He already knew what he would find there, the same photos Edward had shown him weeks ago. Photos of him with Louisa and the children. But when he opened the folder, he found more than that. There were documents, financial records, detailed reports about Louisa's life, including stints in temporary jobs, financial difficulties, and even a police record from when she had filed a complaint against Gus's father for threats. The indignation Bernard felt was overwhelming. Not just for exposing his personal life, but primarily for turning Louisa's story of struggle and dignity into something sordid. As you can see, Edward continued, Mr. Morrison has become involved with a person of questionable character, a woman with an unstable financial history, 2 children from different fathers, and without any social standing compatible with someone of our CEO's caliber. That's enough, Bernard interrupted, standing up. His voice, though calm, carried an authority that instantly silenced the room. What you are doing, Edward, is not just unethical and potentially illegal. It is inhumane. I am merely presenting facts relevant to this decision, Edward retorted. No, you are trying to turn into a scandal. Something that is, in fact, the best thing that has ever happened in my life. Bernard walked to the front of the room, looking directly into the eyes of everyone present. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not defend myself against this ridiculous accusation because there is nothing to defend. Yes, I am in a serious relationship with Louisa Silva, an incredible woman who has single-handedly raised two wonderful children, working multiple jobs while still finding time to be a present and loving mother. He paused, observing the reactions. Edward wants you to see this as a weakness, a distraction. I see it as my greatest strength. For the first time in 15 years, I am not just existing, I am living. And that has made me not only a better person, but a better leader. This is irrelevant, Edward tried to interrupt. The issue is your refusal to consider Innotech's offer. Now we come to the real reason for this meeting. Bernard smiled. It's not about Louisa or the children. It's about money. Ed always was. He turned to the shareholders. I refused Innotech's offer because I know we can do better, much better, and I can prove it. Bernard signaled, and Richard handed documents to everyone present. This is our new strategic plan for the next 5 years. As you can see, it projects growth that would make Nexus worth at least double Innotech's offer. But more important than that, he opened his personal folder and took out the drawing Gus had made. He placed it in the center of the meeting table. This drawing was made by a 5-year-old boy, a boy who, like so many children in this country, grew up without a present father. A boy who now calls me family. The room was in absolute silence. For years I thought success was measured by numbers on spreadsheets and zeros in bank accounts. I recently learned that I was wrong all this time. Success is having someone waiting for you at home. Success is making a difference in the lives of other people. Success is creating something that matters. Bernard took a deep breath before continuing. Nexus has been my life for 15 years. I gave everything to this company. My time, my youth, my personal relationships, and I don't regret it. I am proud of what we built together, but now I have found something that also deserves my dedication. A family. He looked directly at Edward Armstrong. So, ladies and gentlemen, the choice is yours. You can keep me as CEO, and I promise to continue giving my best to make this company grow now with even greater motivation. Or you can remove me, and I will accept your decision without resentment, knowing that regardless of what happens here today, I have already won what truly matters in life. A profound silence followed his words. Then slowly one person began to applaud, then another, and another. Soon almost the entire room was applauding on their feet, with the exception of Edward Armstrong and a few allies, who remained seated with bitter expressions. When the vote finally took place, the result was surprising even to Bernard. 89% of the votes in his favor, an overwhelming majority that left no doubt about the shareholders' confidence in him. As he left the meeting, he found Martha waiting with a huge smile. Congratulations, Dr. Morrison, she said, handing him an envelope. This package arrived for you earlier. Bernard opened the envelope and found official documents from Carlos Maxwell's law firm, confirming that all photos and reports about Louisa and the children had been officially destroyed, under penalty of heavy fines and possible criminal charges if new records appeared. Thank you, Martha. I think I'll celebrate by leaving early today. I have a family waiting for me. Martha's smile widened. I never thought I'd live to hear those words from you. I'm glad you found someone special. Actually, Bernard corrected, I found 3 special people. As he left the Nexus building, Bernard felt lighter than he had ever felt. The victory at the meeting was important, of course, but it wasn't what occupied his thoughts at that moment. He thought of Louisa, Julia, and Gus, how he couldn't wait to tell them the news, to hug them, and say that now nothing would separate them. He stopped at a jewelry store on the way. It was time to formalize what he already knew in his heart. When he arrived at Louisa's apartment, he found the door ajar and heard raised voices inside. Alarmed, he quickly entered and found Louisa arguing with a man Bernard had never seen before. You have no right to show up like this after 3 years, Louisa said, visibly nervous. You renounced all rights when you decided you didn't want to be a father. The man, tall and with an air of arrogance, noticed Bernard's arrival and assessed him from head to toe. So this is the rich guy who's been supporting you? He asked disdainfully. Is that why you now think you're too good to let me see my son? Garrett, you're drunk. Leave before I call the police. I'm not drunk, I'm exercising my right as a father. The man took a step forward, intimidating. Gus is my son, and if I want to see him, you can't stop me. Bernard stepped between Louisa and Garrett. I think you'd better listen to what she said and leave. And who are you to give me orders? The new sucker she found. Garrett laughed, a bitter laugh. Enjoy it while it lasts, friend. Soon she'll suck all your money like she tried to do with me. Garrett, enough, Louisa exclaimed, tears of anger in her eyes. You never gave Gus a penny. Never showed up for a birthday, never bought medicine when he was sick. Because you never let me be a father, Garrett retorted. You always treated me like a bank, just wanting money. I think we've heard enough, Bernard interjected, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Garrett, I don't know what your objective is appearing here after so long, but it's clear it's not Gus's well-being. And what do you know about my son's well-being? Garrett took a step forward, threatening. I know that a father who truly cares doesn't disappear for 3 years, doesn't show up drunk at his son's house, and, most importantly, doesn't traumatize his mother with false accusations and threats. Look at her lawyer, Garrett scoffed. I bet you bought the right to play daddy with my son. That was the last straw for Bernard. I will say this only once. Leave this house now, or I will have to remove you by force. And believe me, that would not end well for you. Something in Bernard's tone, a calm authority that brooked no argument, finally seemed to register in Garrett's drunken mind. He took a step back, looking from Louisa to Bernard. This isn't over, he threatened, pointing a finger. I'm going to get custody of my son. I have rights. Rights you abandoned 3 years ago, Louisa replied. Now leave before the children come home from school and see this pathetic scene. After a few more empty threats, Garrett finally left, slamming the door shut. Louisa collapsed onto the sofa, trembling. He'd never been here before, she explained, her voice choked. I think he found out about our relationship and came, I don't know, to mark his territory. Or maybe he really thinks we're doing well financially now and wants some advantage. Bernard sat beside her, holding her hands. Are you okay? Louisa nodded, wiping away tears. I'm used to his outbursts, but I'm afraid of what he might do. What if he really tries to get custody of Gus? He never cared before, why now? Don't worry about that, Bernard reassured her. No judge would side with a father who abandoned his child for 3 years and shows up drunk demanding rights. Besides, he added with a smile, trying to lighten the mood, now we have the best lawyer in New York City on our side. Our side? Louisa asked, noticing the choice of words. Yes, our side. Bernard took a deep breath and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. This isn't how I planned to do this, but perhaps it's even more appropriate now. He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a single diamond. Nothing ostentatious or exaggerated, just an elegant and sincere piece of jewelry, like the feeling it represented. Louisa Silva, you have completely changed my life. You showed me a world I didn't even know existed. You taught me what truly matters. You and the children are the best gift I could receive. He paused, visibly emotional. I know we haven't known each other long and it might seem rushed, but I've never been so sure of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Louisa looked from the ring to Bernard, tears now of emotion replacing those of anguish. Are you sure? After what you just witnessed? With the whole package of complications that comes with me? Absolutely. In fact, this only reinforces my certainty. I want to protect you and the children. I want us to be an official family. I want to be by your side in all moments, good and bad. Louisa smiled through her tears. Yes, Bernard Morrison, I accept your proposal. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the door opened again and Julia and Gus entered, accompanied by Chloe. Mommy, Julia exclaimed, running to hug Louisa. She stopped suddenly, noticing the ring. What's that? Are you getting married? Louisa looked at Bernard, who nodded with a smile. Yes, honey, we're getting married. Julia's cry of joy could probably be heard throughout the block. She jumped into Bernard's arms. Now you're going to be our real dad? I am, Princess, if you'll have me. Gus, who had been watching the scene with his big curious eyes, approached shyly. Can I call you Dad, then? Bernard felt a lump in his throat. You can, champ. I'd love that. The happiness of that moment, the hugs, the immediate plans Julia began to make for the party, Louisa's expression of relief and joy was like a confirmation for Bernard. He had made the right decision. The only possible decision. In the weeks that followed, many things happened quickly. Edward Armstrong resigned from the Nexus board, after the threat of a lawsuit for invasion of privacy. Garrett, Gus's father, tried to initiate a custody process, but gave up when Carlos Maxwell presented evidence of his history of abandonment and non-payment of child support. Bernard and Louisa decided on a simple wedding, with only close friends and family. The ceremony took place in the garden of a small inn on the outskirts of New York City, with Julia as flower girl and Gus as ring-bearer, carrying the rings with all the seriousness he could muster. "I never thought I'd see this day," Richard commented during the reception. "The most dedicated workaholic I've ever known, getting married and starting a family." "Life has its surprises," Bernard replied, watching Louisa dance with the children. "Sometimes we find what we need when we least expect it." "And Nexus? I'll continue to give my best, but now with a greater balance. The company is important, but it's not everything." After the honeymoon, a family trip to Disney, a unanimous choice by Julia and Gus, the couple decided they would live in Bernard's apartment, more spacious and comfortable for the children, but not before making some essential renovations. The minimalist office was transformed into a colorful room for Julia. One of the guest suites became Gus's private kingdom, with walls decorated with dinosaurs and superheroes. The kitchen, once practically untouched, came alive with colorful utensils and the constant smell of cakes and cookies. And most importantly, the main wall of the living room, once occupied by a very expensive abstract artwork, now displayed a growing collection of family photos and children's drawings. 6 months after the wedding, one evening while having dinner together, Louisa made an announcement that would complete the transformation of their lives. "I think we'll need another room," she said with an enigmatic smile. "For January next year." Julia was the first to understand. "A baby! We're going to have a baby!" The look of surprise and joy on Bernard's face confirmed what Louisa already knew. The family they had built together, against all odds and prejudices, was the greatest wealth they could desire. That night, lying in bed with Louisa asleep in his arms, Bernard reflected on how his life had completely changed in less than a year. From a lonely, work-obsessed executive, he had transformed into a fulfilled man, with a family he loved above all else. Nexus continued to prosper under his leadership, now more humanized and conscious. But true success, Bernard had finally understood, was not measured by stock values or the size of the empire he had built. True success lay in the simple moments, in Julia's smile when she learned something new, in Gus's concentration while assembling a puzzle, in the peace he felt falling asleep beside Louisa every night, in the tiny life growing in his wife's womb, promising to further expand the love they had found in each other. And to think it had all begun with a casual encounter on a rainy afternoon in Central Park. How could a simple detour in the path transform an entire life? Bernard didn't know the answer, but he thanked every day the destiny that had led him to Julia on that park bench. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are found when we least expect them, in the most improbable places. For Bernard Morrison, the treasure had a name, a surname, and a smile that lit up his days: his family. The true wealth that no corporate empire could ever buy. Dear listeners, we hope Bernard and Louisa's story has touched your hearts. To experience more emotional stories like this, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking the icon on the left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. And tell us in the comments, from which city in the United States are you watching? Your participation is what keeps our channel alive and vibrant. We look forward to your return for our next story.